Hi, my name is Neil McKnight, and I'm going to demonstrate how I use Quixel Suite 2.0 to texture this set of binoculars and stand. Firstly, I'll import the mesh I've exported from 3ds Max as an OBJ. I had these two objects separated as separate elements inside of Max for the exporter to recognise the two separate mesh groups. I'll be using a colour ID map, normal and AO for both mesh groups, but bake their curvature maps inside of 3Do. I'll keep the resolution set to 4K and keep the export target to Toolbag 2. So let's go. I'll fast forward this part while it creates the maps needed. Okay, let's get started. I'll open 3Do and I'll make my own post-process settings. I'll use this preset as a starting point, but I'll change the settings. I'll turn on high quality resampling, increase the intensity slightly, increase the SSAO, decrease the optical vignetting, but increase the scale. Turn on CCD blooming. Okay. I'll change the cube map to Unreal, put solid background, and increase the brightness a tad. I'll save these camera settings as default for the project by clicking here. So let's start texturing. Okay, so I'll hold Shift and C and click the dark green material. I'll search for polymer and use polymer black. Darken the albedo slightly. Then I'll increase the gloss. I want to reduce the noise in the gloss of the polymer material. So firstly I'll turn the shading mode to gloss, so I can see the changes more clearly when I reduce the texture intensity. Okay, now I'll switch back to full shading. I still feel the normal intensity is a bit too strong, so I'll reduce it around about half. Now I'm going to add some wear and tear to the material. I'll add a clean layer. I'll rename it to wear. Change its colour to white. And I'll put its blend mode to overlay. In the gloss, I'll change its colour to around 60. Actually, I'll change the albedo blend mode to screen. And then I'll edit the mask. I think I'll use light edge scratches as a starting point. I'll increase the secondary texture influence to 100. Tightness to around 15, and then contrast to 24. This is a great start, but there are sections of the mask I'd like to manually paint out. Before I do though, I'll make sure I have my undos enabled in the Performance tab, and I'll click Auto Fix Seams. I'll use the basic brush and shrink it slightly. I'll use this to paint out the areas I feel look unbelievable, for where the wear and tear would naturally appear on the model. You can either use a mouse or a Wacom for this. I use both depending on the situation. Okay, that's good. I'll paint out some edges using a grunge brush. Around these buttons, for example, the mask is too strong for what I'm trying to achieve. I think this looks a lot more natural. And I'll do the same method for some of the edges, just to break up that procedural look. Okay, I'll accept that mask. The blend mode for the albedo is quite strong, so I'll change it back to overlay. Yeah, that looks a lot better. One more thing on this material. I feel like the whole surface is a little too clean. To fix it, I'll add a colour overlay. The quickest way to do this is by holding Control when clicking Create New Layer. I'll darken the albedo slightly. And then I'll set the gloss to black, but then I'll reduce the opacity to around 25%. I'll edit the mask. I'll use large miscoloration. I'll click on Advanced and it lets me edit the scale of the blend texture. Then I'll disable Advanced and go back to the basic controls. I'll lower the tightness and then I'll increase the contrast. Okay, that should do. Now you can see I have some nice gloss breakup over the whole material. It's subtle, but it works really well. I'm going to add a logo and some text now, so I'll do this by adding a new layer. I'll rename it and then edit the mask. I'll click Paint Mask in Photoshop. And then I'll minimize 3Do while I load another file with my masks already set up. I'll use Ctrl A to select all, and then Ctrl Shift C to copy merged. I'll close the document by using Ctrl W. Now I'll simply paste the mask into the layer by using Ctrl V and accept the mask. I'll lighten the gloss. And then the albedo. Cool. You can move the cube map horizontally in 3Do by holding Shift and right mouse button, then dragging. To move it vertically, also hold Control. Okay, now we'll add the glass. And I'll use the window material. I'm going to change the mask to something more confined to the edges of the glass. I'll use sandy dirt and adjust the contrast. That works well. Perfect. Now for the rubber. I'll use a black rubber material. I'll darken the albedo. And set the gloss to about 85. Then for the rubber stress, I'll set the blend mode to colour dodge and put the albedo to 255. I'll set the opacity low, around 5%, as I want the rubber stress to pretty much only affect the gloss. With the gloss for the rubber stress, I'll set the blend to overlay and reduce the RGB to around 50. Now for the mask. Here I'll use scuff paint. And lower the tightness. That should do. That's perfect. I want these changes to be subtle and not too over the top. To view the prop in different lighting scenarios, you can use the arrow keys to swap out the cube maps. For this material ID, I want to use a material with a higher gloss for some material breakup. I'll use Gunmetal Black O2 for this. That's cool, but I'll make the base a little glossier. And I'll remove that subtle highlight layer. I'll edit the mask for the details as it's a little too much right now. I'll use scuff paint. The material is also used here, so this looks great. I'll accept the mask. Next I'm going to bring in an ambient occlusion map. I'm going to place this as a multiply over my albedo and gloss. So I'll minimize 3D. Open my AO, select all, copy, close, and then I'll paste it. Set it to multiply, and then set the opacity to around 50%. And then rename it. I'll load up 3Do, and click refresh. I'll do the same on the albedo. This brings back the AO from the baked mesh details. Okay, that looks good. I'll reuse the gunmetal materials for the screws by selecting the layer and then holding Ctrl C and clicking on the screws ID. There we go. Now it's sharing the same material. I'll do the same with the polymer and the controls on the top. Now for the plastic buttons. Shift C, and I'll search for plastic. This will work. I'll just have to change the albedo to a dark grey. Yep, that works fine. For the white rubber buttons here, I can reuse some of the previous work I did on the black rubber. So I'll add the black rubber material again. I'll go out of that group and copy the rubber stress mask. I'll rename this group. And I'll right click and paste the mask. I'll brighten up the albedo. I'll set the blend mode for rubber stress to overlay and change the RGB to around 66. That's a little too dark, so I'll make it a little bit lighter. For the gloss of the rubber stress, I'll darken it and set it to overlay. That looks nice. Now for the metal clasp that holds the strap. I'll use the aluminium as a base material for this. But remove the aluminium scratches. I'll add material. And add the rust course. Okay, I'll change its scale to -1. And then brighten the gloss a little. It's a bit strong, so I'll reduce the opacity to around 50%. Actually, I'll make the gloss darker. In the normal, I'll reduce the intensity and reduce the opacity of the albedo. For the mask, I'll use sand. Lower the texture influence and ambient occlusion. I'll bring the tightness down and bring up the contrast. Yeah, that's cool. Now for the strap itself. I'll add the material and search for nylon. I'll use the nylon ballistic. To confine this material to this strap, add the material to a group, hold C and then click the strap. It's a bit large and running in the wrong direction, so I'll go up into the group and right click, then click rotate 90 degrees. I'll set the scale to -2 and then I'll reduce the gloss. I'll change the colour to more of a red to introduce some colour. I have some text I want to add to the strap. So I'll minimise 3Do, open up my PSD, drag over the text to my albedo layer, close that file down, they've been placed into the wrong group, so I'll fix that and delete that layer. Perfect. Now I'll reload 3Do and then click refresh. Okay, this mesh group's done now. I'll fast forward until I've done the same process on the stand. Okay, here you can see I've used the same techniques I applied to the binoculars. I've added some wear on the text, and I'll repeat that on the binoculars now. Also, I've noticed the strap is looking a little too clean, so we'll resolve that before calling it done. We'll add a clean layer and set the colour to something a little worn. We'll mask it with sand. I'll reduce the curvature and increase the contrast. That looks good, but there's some parts I'd like to paint out, especially around this aluminium clasp. I'll swap to a grunge brush and paint out the areas I don't need. It looks a little too heavy here as well. And I'll do the same on the other side. Okay, I'll accept the mask. I think it looks a little too strong, so I'll reduce the albedo opacity to about 75. That looks more natural. Now for wearing the text like I did on the stand. I'll find the text layer inside the polymer black material. I'll put the text layer into its own group. And I'll edit that mask. I'll swap to a nice damage brush. So I'll just keep it subtle again, and I won't overdo it. I'll do the same on the front logo. That's a little too much. I'll undo that. Okay, I think I'll call this done. I'm pleased with the end result, and I hope you guys have learned something new. Thanks for watching.